Hi Student Success, this is your lecture video for Chapter 3. So Chapter 3 is all about different types of thought. So we're just going to use the textbook to go through here. So as always, at the beginning of the chapter, there is a self-assessment just to see where you are now, your attitude and knowledge toward different types of thinking, and then your goal setting as well. So throughout this chapter, it talks about creative thinking, critical thinking, problem solving. So all these different types of cognitive processes that as a college student, person in general, needs to be aware of and utilize in different types of situations. So in the first section, it talks about Bloom's taxonomy, and these are the general types of thinking skills ranked in order from most basic to most complex. And so usually this is like in the form of a pyramid, but you can see one of the basic ways of knowing or understanding information is just being able to remember it, recall it. So this is where you're doing like that repetition and kind of going over and repeating and memorizing information, which is important, but then you want to build on it from there. You want to understand what it is that you're remembering and working on. Eventually you want to be able to apply it in different situations. You want to analyze it, which means you're going to break it down into pieces to look at how all the parts connect to the overall larger picture. You want to evaluate it, look to see, is this, what can I derive from this? What are my conclusions? How quality is the information? And then create. And that could take on lots of different ways. You're creating something new, putting all the pieces together to form something new. And so those are the ways of knowing. There's like a little exercise here that you're welcome to do. You don't have to do it. And then verbs that go along with each of those levels of understanding or knowing. The next section talks about critical thinking, which is what we all want to aspire to. We can be proficient readers and proficient thinkers, but we want to be able to critically engage in information, especially when we are looking at text information for academic purposes. And so in general, there's a critical thinking process we want to go through, and it walks you through these different things. What is the problem? What is the research question? What is the issue? What is the concept that I'm looking at? Are there options? What kind of information do I need to gather? What do I know about my options? Evaluating that information, how quality is it? And then looking to see if there are fallacies, defects in the argument or in the logic. And here's a whole table about different types of fallacies. And you're going to see these types of fallacies being used oftentimes in politics. I think politics gives us a great examples of tons of different fallacies. Whenever someone will really generalize, say a whole group of people does these things based on like a small sample size. Or you might even have used this in the past, like everyone does this or everyone believes this, so you should too. Making weak analogies, weak similarities. So those are all examples of these different kind of fallacies, and that's what you look for when you're evaluating information. So here are some other things to think about in your critical thinking. How are you intaking the information? What research do you have to support? And lots of different tips for being a stronger critical thinker. Okay. One thing I do like to make sure I point out, and I believe we talked about it a little bit in the past in different chapters, critical thinkers do evaluate their sources, especially if you're using online information. You're going to want to evaluate it, looking at the URL, like the domain, is it .com, .edu, .net. Look to see who wrote the information, why did they write it, what was their purpose, when did they update it, what kind of facts or opinions are presented. So all of that goes into critical thinking as well. The next section talks about this creative thinking process, and sometimes people will think that they're not a very creative thinker, and so this addresses some myths. Creativity is inherited, or creativity is freeform, and sometimes we think because we're not maybe artistic or musically inclined or whatever it might be that we're thinking, that does not mean that we're not creative. And so and we can actually hone these skills. How can we become more creative? Well, you can read, you can take in information, watch information, just find out as much as you can about something you're interested in. Develop flexibility. Don't always assume there's just one right answer. Are there multiple answers? Are there multiple perspectives? And there's a little exercise there. Think about different ways to combine ideas. Can you take an old way and make it something new? Can you think in metaphors and, figurative language? And then ask a lot of questions to yourself, to other people. So there are ways to hone those those creative thinking skills. The next and last section talks about problem solving and decision making. And there is a very deliberate step that you want to take when you're making big decisions. These are not just like your everyday, what am I going to eat for lunch decision? So maybe if you're thinking about like, should I take summer classes? What is the problem? Well, I want to graduate sooner. Okay, that's the problem, but I also have to work, right? How can you narrow the problem down? Are there smaller problems? You want to go to school, but you also have to support yourself. What are some possible solutions? Well, you can take one class in the summer and then work the rest of the time, or you can take the summer off of school altogether. Coming up with possible solutions and then choose the solution and evaluate it. So really making sure that you're spending time reflecting, thinking through all the decisions that are those larger pieces. Okay? So as always, I encourage you to take a deeper look at the chapter itself. This was just a overview of the chapter. So really spend some time, especially if you feel like you struggle with creative thinking, or if you struggle with making sure that you are really evaluating information critically so that you are getting the best quality information as a college student. So spend some time inside the chapter itself, and then I will talk to you about the assignment that goes along with this as well.